Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, English Home Language, that I will be representing. I see there are still people logging in. Let's give it another 2 minutes, then we'll start. Hello there, I'm still here. I see there are still people logging in. We'll give it another minute, then we'll start. Fine, let's start. Good morning, everybody. I'm Wendy Peppler, Chief Education Specialist for Languages. Just a few things before we start with the webinar. Let's cover some of the basics. If you are struggling to hear me, make sure your audio is on and your speaker volume is turned up. We have tested on this side, myself with the organizer, so if you can't hear me, the audio problem is on your side. You will automatically be muted when joining the session. Should you have any questions, you can ask your question in the question box below or on your right, or raise your hand. To raise your hand, click the icon on your dashboard below or on your right. After this presentation, you can download it in the handout box below or on your right. I want to mention at this time, the presentation does go quite quickly as we have limited time and I must finish it in time, but download the presentation afterwards, then you can have all the notes you need. You will also find all this information in the question box below or on your right. Remember to send us your questions. Attendees are encouraged to ask questions and leave comments. However, irrelevant or inappropriate comments will result in the attendee being dismissed from the session. If we did not get your question, please send an email to academics@impact.co.za. Questions in the question box will be answered and made available afterwards. If you did not receive the questions and answers, please send an email to info@impact.co.za. You can also visit the Impact YouTube channel for recordings of the session. And now an exciting news. These sessions will also be available on Optimi's webpage, where you can see all past presentations, as well as there's going to be a list, as far as I understand, of the presentations still to come. Once again, we look at the June examinations. At this stage, we still haven't got a final answer to this, but it is highly likely that you will not be writing the June examinations, but Anyhow, prepare as if you are going to write it, because it is an extra preparation before you write your prelim examination. Study the following for paper 2. All these poems were included for the June exam, the same poems for prelim and the same poems for your final examinations at the end of the year. Edward, Edward, The Going, The Good Morrow, and Death Shall Have No Dominion, Toads, I Have My Father's Voice, Sonnet 146, Naming of Parts, The Child Dying, The Loss of India, which we will be discussing today, and Visiting Room, that we will be discussing today, Remembrance, and Notes on Answering an Unseen Poem. Your novel, The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. I really hope that you have all read this book already. You need to study the entire novel. It is quite a thick novel to read. Drama, Long Day's Journey into Night, which we studied the first term. You also need to study the entire play. For sample questions, go to previous exam papers. They can be found on my.impact. And extra or additional study notes can also be sourced from the internet. Now, let's get started with our poems for this week. The first one, The Loss of India by Zulfikar Ghose. You will find it on page 132 of your study guide. Just a bit of background about this poem, which is based on a real event in the history. The beginning of the poem depicts the official celebration that took place when India became independent from England, and India was split into two parts, into India and Pakistan, in 1947. In 1948, Mahatma Gandhi, the well-known leader of non-violent protest against the British, was shot dead by a Hindu man. This man had been furious at India's partition, in other words, the division, the split, and felt that Gandhi had betrayed the country. The poet, a young boy at the time, was embittered by the partition of the two countries, which affected him deeply because he was born in India, but in Sialkot, which became part of Pakistan. The young boy felt a loss because of what had happened to India and the brutal manner in which one of his countrymen, a Hindu, killed the peacemaker Gandhi. These two incidents marked the end of his youth and his innocence. Now, let's read the poem. You will see there's a one up top. This poem is divided into three parts. This is part 1. Eagles cartwheeled above the illuminations of Independence Day. The dogs sniffed at the electric bulbs which sizzled like fat. The tall grass the monsoons left on the mountains was aflame like corn in the setting August sun. Two stones collided, sparked. India began to burn. Part 2. At Mahatma Gandhi's prayer meeting, under a circus wheel on the tricolour, that is their flag, you will see it just now, the air intoning religious verses, a man stood in the scabbard of the crowd, machine gun at the tip of his zealous tongue. What well-tutored doves the politicians had released into the skies above Delhi, had already blackened with soot. Of communal hatred, The air chanted, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible. Gandhi nodded, warmed by his goat's milk diet. A Moses and a Muhammad thinned, to the bones of a self-denying innocence, mild as foam on the tortuous crest of his people's violence, straight as a walking stick on the savage contours of his country. When the bullets hit him, his body was cut into the bars of a jail he had never left. His stomach shriveled in another hunger fast. Part 3. A boy in the street, sulking in his boots, kicked at stones and pouted his lips at crows. There was the shade to retreat to, the doors, to be behind, but the pride of the mountains annoyed him, the neighing peaks loud, with thunder exhaling the smoke of monsoon clouds. His nostrils twitched, like a cow's when a fly sits there, for the sea air of Bombay was salt, dry, and how could he describe his loss? How desperately calm the landscapes were! His heart, become a stone in the catapult of his mind, could have struck the foolish adult passions where murder and faith excluded each other. Though eagles still hung like electric fans in the sky and the rock suggested permanence. In the blood, in the earth, was not poultry-yard slaughter. The boy cushioned his heart in the moss of withdrawal, for his India and his youth were lost. Let's go to the poem in detail. Note that the poem is divided into 3 parts. Part 1. Here we see the division of India into India and Pakistan, the celebrations and potential conflict. Part 2 describes Mahatma Gandhi's prayer meeting and assassination by a radical Hindu opposed to the division of the 2 countries. Part 3. The poet as a boy experiencing the conflict in his country and reacting with concern. Part 1. Eagles cartwheeled above the illuminations of Independence Day. The dogs sniffed at the electric bulbs which sizzled like fat. Electric bulbs sizzled like fat. We see a simile. On the day that India celebrated its independence as a state separate from Pakistan, the poet notes that there were eagles in the sky, symbolic of freedom, but also birds of prey. Dogs also form part of the scene. If we see the dogs sniffed at the electric bulbs. In Hinduism, largely found in India, it is believed that dogs guard the doors of heaven and hell, whereas in Islam, Pakistan, the dog is regarded as ritually unclean, a scavenger. The imagery in this part of the poem shows us the celebration of the freedom or independence of India and Pakistan, but also sounds a warning that tensions are simmering beneath the surface, that you will see the electric bulb sizzled like fat. You can already pick up the simmering beneath the surface. Part 1 continued. The image of the electric bulbs which sizzled like fat clearly points to a volatile situation, one that could explode at any moment, which has the potential to be deadly. The tall grass the monsoons left on the mountains was aflame like corn in the setting August sun. There again we have a simile. The tall grass was aflame like corn in the setting August sun. Do you see the image? Two stones collided, sparked. India began to burn. This tension continues in the second stanza when we see the potential for grass fires, where just a spark would be needed before the whole of India began to burn. Part 2. That spark is provided in Part 2 that we speak of in Part 1. But before we get to the ignition, we need to look at the background of Mahatma Gandhi. Although Gandhi was a Hindu, he is claimed by Hindus, Jains, and Muslims alike because he tried to reconcile the differences between religious groups and preached non-violence and tolerance for all human beings. Non-violence is essentially a Jain belief, but it transcends many religions in that it promotes peace and universal brotherhood. That is why you see symbols of no fewer than 4 religions in this part of the poem. Fanatics in any religion would regard such a person as betraying their cause. Gandhi was assassinated by a fanatical, overzealous Hindu. Part 2 continued. Remember, I spoke about the flag. There the flag is at Mahatma Gandhi's prayer meeting under Ashoka's wheel on the tricolor, 3-colored flag, the orange, the white, and the green. And there you will see the wheel in the middle, Ashoka's wheel. The air intoning religious verses. Remember, it's at a prayer meeting. The prayer meeting presided over by Gandhi is depicted as being under Ashoka's wheel on the tricolor. In other words, held under the new Indian flag, the design of which contains Ashoka's wheel. Your glossary in your study guide tells you that this was the symbol of a Buddhist and became the new emblem on the India's flag, the tricolor, saffron, orange at the top, white in the middle, green at the bottom. A man stood in the scabbard of the crowd. This is a metaphor. The scabbard of the crowd. Machine gun at the tip of his zealous tongue. We learn of a man standing in the scabbard of the crowd in the midst of the prayer meeting and intoning of religious verses. A scabbard is used to house a sword, to keep it safe until it is unsheathed to be used in battle. Another word for scabbard, in other words, would be the sheath of a sword, or you speak of a sheath of a knife. While it keeps the sword safe, it also keeps others safe from its lethal purpose and is out of view, not visible as a lethal weapon. In the poem, the man who is in this safe and non-visible position is a zealot, a religious extremist who regarded Gandhi's actions as the betrayal of Hindus. Line 11 indicates that he is there to assassinate Gandhi because of his fanatical beliefs, his fanatical hatred of Muslims. Machine gun at the tip of his zealous gun. In other words, he is there to assassinate Gandhi. What well-tutored doves the politicians what well-tutored doves the politicians. This is also a metaphor. The doves like the politicians, or the politicians like the doves, had released into the skies above Delhi, had already blackened with soot of communal hatred. Doves have been released into the sky as a symbol of peace. They are well tutored, however. This is also a metaphor, as the doves are the people who have been tutored by politicians. There is an attempt to attain peace by having a show of peace. People who talk about peace and try to convince the citizens that peace has become a reality or will still be made possible by the separation of the two states. Their attempt seems to have failed. However, the doves have already blackened with soot of communal hatred. The situation is charged with tension, as foreshadowed by the ominous signs in part 1 of the poem. Of communal hatred, the air chanted the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible. Gandhi nodded, warmed by his goat's milk diet. A Moses and a Muhammad thinned to the bones of a self-denying innocence. Mild as foam on the tortured crest of his people's violence, straight as a walking stick. Here we have two similes. Mild as foam, his innocence mild as foam, and then his tortuous crest, straight as a walking stick, also a simile. On the savage contours of his country. The poet shows his allegiance to Gandhi's belief and course of action in lines 15 and 16. Of communal hatred, the air chanted the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, and the Bible. Then in lines 17 to 22, Gandhi nodded, warmed by his goat's milk diet. A Moses and a Muhammad thinned to the bones of self-denying innocence. Mild as foam on the tortured crest of his people's violence, straight as a walking stick on the savage contours of his country. First, he shows how peace is a realistic possibility. The chanting in the air is made up of Hindu, Muslim, and Christian chants. Then the Mahatma nods, a Moses and a Muhammad. He represents not only the Hindu faith, but is also associated with Christianity and Islam. He stands out as having heroic qualities, straight as a walking stick, standing firmly for his beliefs and in his straightness, contrasting with the savage contours of his country. He is not a hero who will lead an attacking force and conquer, but mild as foam, a non-violent hero who nevertheless stands above the rest, foam on the crest of a wave. When the bullets hit him, his body was cut into the bars of a jail. He had never left. There we find a metaphor. His stomach shriveled in another hunger fast. The poet has built up a picture of a peace-loving, peace-promoting man, one who does not seem to pose a threat to anyone. The metaphor in line 24 refers to Gandhi's imprisonment in India and in South Africa. His arrest generally being connected with his policy of passive resistance, such as not registering or having his registration certificate. In line 24, not only refers to his actual, his literal imprisonment, however, but the fact that he was figuratively imprisoned in jail of communal hatred. The restricted outlook that more extreme people have towards those are other. In line 25 reminds us that unlike his assassination, he expressed his difference of opinion or tried to get his way by non-violent means, such as a hunger strike, rather than cutting a person down with bullets. And yet he was struck by bullets. There is a sense of shock when we encounter line 23, when the bullets hit him. The bullets from the assassin with a zealous tongue who had sheltered in the scabbard of the crowd. Part 3. This incident took place in the capital of India, New Delhi. In part 3, the focus shifts to what was then known as Bombay, Mumbai in modern-day India, where the poet would have been a boy of 12 years when Gandhi was assassinated. A boy in the street, sulking in his boots, kicked at stones and pouted his lips at crows. There was the shade to retreat to, the doors to be behind, but the pride of the mountains annoyed him, the neighing peaks loud with thunder exhaling the smoke of monsoon clouds. This is a typical scene of a young boy who is angry at the world and takes his anger out on the environment. He kicks stones. He glares at the birds, instead of cooling his anger by retreating to the shade of going indoors. He vents his frustration in the open, annoyed at the mountains for being there. The mountain peaks are described as neighing. In other words, he is irritated by them, as if they were making noises empty of thought. There is anger too. The monsoon is building up. In other words, this monsoon storm is building up, and the atmosphere is electric, as it was in part 1, remember the globes. His nostrils twitched like a cow's when a fly sits there. There we actually see another simile. His nostrils twitched like a cow's when a fly sits there. For the sea air of Bombay was salt dry, and how he describes his loss. Here we see the cause of his anger. How could he describe his loss? When we relate his loss to the violent incidents that followed partition and included the assassination of Gandhi, we can understand the boy's anger. It is anger at his helpless frustration regarding the tragic turn of events about which he can do nothing, and which he was helpless to prevent. Now we must look with new understanding at the title of the poem. This event, the assassination of Gandhi, and all that he stood for, is equated to the loss of India, the title of the poem. The entire country is lost because of the mentality of the assassin. The young boy is completely disillusioned that the adult world can be so ignorant or corrupt or twisted to produce an assassin of this nature, and to allow such a travesty of justice to take place. How desperately calm the landscapes were. His heart became a stone in the catapult, a metaphor. A stone, his heart, a stone in the catapult. What do you do with a catapult? You shoot away stones with a catapult. His heart became a stone in the catapult. Of his mind could have struck the foolish adult. How could the earth stand calmly by, as it were, instead of erupting to show the enormity of the disaster? The boy's heart is compared to a stone in the catapult of his mind, heart and soul. He wants to shoot down the adult world where one's religious belief can actually cause one to murder. Passions where murder and faith have excluded each, other. Passions where murder and faith excluded each other. Though eagles still hung like electric fans, a simile, also a repetition from the first part one, where the eagles like electric bulbs. Though eagles still hung like electric fans in the sky, and the rocks suggested permanence, the same tension remains. Eagles still hung like electric fans, promising freedom, but not bringing it about. Instead of feeling secure in the knowledge of his native land's permanence, he is jolted by the violent partition, and now this bloodshed. The blood in the earth was not poultry yard slaughter. The boy cushioned his heart in the moss of withdrawal, for his India and his youth were lost. He realizes full well that this death was not poultry yard slaughter. Gandhi is not an insignificant chicken killed for the pot, but his death has rocked the permanence of India to its foundations. We see the boy cushioning his heart in the moss of withdrawal as a child buries his head in his pillow, to weep or to withdraw from the world in grief. Why? Because his India, the country that he had known and believed in, was lost. It is not the India he thought it to be, and he has lost his innocent youth and grown up to the reality of the adult world where double standards and betrayal exist. Okay, now a very, very short poem. Visiting Room by Jeremy Cronin. You will find this poem on page 147 in the study guide. The visiting room. The speaker is describing the window in a visiting room in prison. He says it is a window's function to allow light through. The light symbolizes the poet's wife who is visiting. She is admitted to her husband as light is admitted through the glass of the tiny window that separates them. Their hands cannot touch, and prison guards are present throughout the visit. Let's read the poem. To admit light, that's a window's vocation. Here we find personification. Or a man to a wife at this very place, where the wall becomes, for the briefest moments, a window, shadowed by warders, a glass plate, its sheer quiddity, its coldness, forever between our hands. Now let's look at it more deeply. To admit light, that's a window's vocation. A vocation is your job that you have. Note that the sentence structure has been turned around. A window's vocation, its calling, its job, is to admit light. By doing this, it places far more emphasis on the purpose of the window. Normally, you would say a window's vocation is to admit light. Here it has been turned around, and as we say here, it has been turned around to place more emphasis on the purpose of the window, which is to let light in. This is very significant to prisoners. The window is so important to him as being his only source of light and of being able to see his wife, that he humanizes it and elevates its purpose to a vocation or a calling. That's what it has been called to do. That is its purpose. Here you can see the source of light, of literal light coming through the window, and then also the light, his wife, figuratively being the light in his life. Or a man to a wife. At this very place. A window's vocation is to admit light, or to admit a man to his wife here, at this very place being the prison. In other words, the window allows the man and wife to see each other. This is the pane of glass between them, where the wall becomes, for the briefest moments, a window. The wall becomes a window for a very, very short time. If you are moving your eyes across the wall, they will scan the window only momentarily. So we can conclude that the window must be a very small one. He may be emphasizing how short the visiting period is by saying the briefest moments. Most of the time, the window is just part of the wall. But for brief moments when the speaker receives a visitor, it is really a window. Shadowed by warders. What are warders? They are the guards in the prison. The fact that warders shadow the window, which is the prisoner's sole source of natural light, it certainly becomes dark and gloomy. Even worse, they are constantly there while the prisoner and visitor communicate, casting a miserable cloud over proceedings because there is no privacy when the speaker wants to exchange personal messages and endearments with his wife. A glass plate, its sheer quiddity, its coldness. The glass of a window is hard and cold. The poet brings this out by describing it as a glass plate, inorganic and two-dimensional, rather than personified as it was earlier as having a vocation or calling. Its very nature is its coldness. Forever between our hands. This glass plate, its sheer quiddity, its coldness, forever between our hands. It also prevents them from having any physical contact. When they try to touch hands, all they can feel is the cold, unyielding surface of the glass, instead of the warm flesh and blood person on the other side of the window. If you have any questions, please post them in the question box below. As I said at the beginning, I will answer your questions and they will be sent to you. If by any reason you do not receive these questions and answers, please send an email to info@impact.co.za. Please, however, give 2 days before you request this, as it could take 2 days for all this to be able to be done. What I want to remind you is that you can now download the presentation from the box below, where the entire presentation is there. You can also get the presentation on YouTube, and as I mentioned at the beginning, it is now also available on our webpage for you to download. I urge you to start studying earnestly and to carry on studying and study the notes in your study guide, answer the questions in your book, mark them by using the facilitator guide. Remember, your opinion may still be correct even if the answer book does not give it in that way, as long as you always motivate your answer referring to the poem. If you are not registered with IMPAC, you can contact us at info@impact.co.za. Thank you for attending this presentation. I hope you found it informative and that you learned something out of it. Good luck with your studies. Thank you and goodbye.